What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Capitalize podcast, where we help investors build wealth in real estate. I'm your host, Grant Smith, and as always, this podcast is brought to you by our private lending company, Sharper Capital Partners. If you want to learn how to use private or hard money to help scale your real estate investment business, you can visit us at sharpercapitalpartners.com. Okay, so on this episode today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. My guest is actually going to be my business partner, Cascella. Chris is head of underwriting and loan origination over here at Sharper Capital Partners. Chris, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Happy to be on the other side of things for once.
So obviously, one of the big things that I wanted to hit on here, it's Chris's birthday coming up. So I thought it'd be a little bit full circle, or be a good full circle conversation to talk about Chris's background, what led him into joining the business, and then everything basically between college and getting here. So first and foremost, Chris, why don't you back up and talk about your college experience, what you were doing back then before, you got out of school, and then we'll kind of wind up into what you're doing today.
Yeah, I feel like I'm slacking because for your birthday, all I did was post an Instagram on our Instagram profile, who had like 5 followers at the time. So I'll have to do it better this time around. It's funny thinking back, because we tell this story pretty often when people ask us about the business and about how we met and everything like that. But the way that Grant and I met was we both went to the University of Cincinnati. And in the beginning, we were both actually doing everything in our power to be put into dorms where we could live alone. Because I think going into college, we both were trying to figure out what we were going to do, where we were going to go, ended up making somewhat last minute decision to go to school. And of course, after requesting a single in some of the nicer dorms on campus at UC, Grant and I were both placed in a quad in quite literally the notoriously dirty Dabney is what they called it, the worst dorm on campus. So it ended up being just an incredible experience. Obviously, Grant and I are here today. We developed a great relationship and lived together throughout college, and we're always kind of playing around with different business ideas and bonded over our entrepreneurial mindsets and entrepreneurial interests. And I bounced around in college from major to major. I came in as a finance major. My freshman year, I was focused on anything and everything except for school, even though, I had high aspirations. I just couldn't get myself to focus, and told myself that I was not a numbers guy. And I remember having that conversation with Grant and telling him over and over, I'm like, okay, listen, this is just these numbers things, not for me. So I changed to entrepreneurship. I actually enjoyed the coursework in entrepreneurship and some of the founder-minded classes. And we did some activities even in our first year of school centered around founding a business, and really enjoyed that stuff. And then I added marketing, did marketing there for a little bit, all the way up until I was ready to graduate in 4 years. And then was like, wait a minute, I don't know if I want to graduate with a marketing degree. What am I going to do? So then at the last minute, I added finance again, ended up going down the analytical finance academy path, following in Grant's footsteps, and graduated in 5 years at UC with a finance and a marketing degree. And then, I'll stop it there, because I know that there's plenty to cover, even just thinking about those 3 years for you, 5 years for me.
No, it was a great time. It's funny because when we started off, we had the typical experience of when college students go to university, you don't always connect with the people who are actually going to be your friends for the duration of your college experience or your life potentially. And because when we first started, it was like we were literally on opposite sides of the room. And in a lot of ways, from a friendship perspective, we were on opposite sides of the room. I think we were always kind of confused as to why, we weren't hanging out with each other, because I thought you were a really cool, interesting guy. And at the time, I was hoping you thought I was a cool, interesting guy too, but I don't think you did. And like you said, we really had a positive experience in terms of learning a lot about the opportunities in business through the education that we had. One of the things I'd like to highlight, obviously, because I was right next to you throughout that process, was kind of your trajectory as a student. And then we'll get into, the internships and things that you did. But as a student, like you said, when you first went to school, you just weren't focused on it. And kind of materialize into this thing as, oh, I'm just not good at school, or I'm not good at this subject. But it really turned out that once you honed your focus, you could just do whatever you wanted. And now I think that has kind of been a through line into how you've pursued your life altogether, knowing, hey, if I just work hard at something, I'm probably going to get pretty good at it. What about the education environment did you appreciate and did you not appreciate when you were going through it?
I think coming into school, I just had such a bad taste in my mouth with education in general. I did not enjoy high school. I think a lot of people can relate to this, especially in real estate. I didn't see how what I was learning in my English classes or my calculus classes was ever going to be relevant to what I wanted to do, which I knew was going to be entrepreneurship of some kind in the future. And so I came into college and I thought to myself, okay, this is finally going to be the time when I'm taking classes that are really going to help me jumpstart my career. They're going to propel me towards whatever future is going to be, my career path going forward. And I think that actually was true. I just wasn't ready for it. I think it just came much quicker than I was expecting. And I realized how much harder it was going to be than I thought. And so instead, I think, fortunately or unfortunately, what I told myself when I said I wasn't a numbers guy and, oh, I'm just not made for this whole school thing, I think more than anything, it was kind of an excuse. I was like, oh, I'll just subconsciously, I'm saying to myself, oh, okay, I'll just say this. And that means I won't have to try as hard. Because if I just say it's not for me, then it's like, okay, oh, I'm not trying, it's not for me. And we'll see what else is out there. But there was a lot of kind of self-reflection that happened that first year. And it was really trying to find my crowd because it was making new friends. It was experiencing, a different environment altogether, and really a lot of responsibility that I hadn't had in the past, like structuring my own schedule and doing my work on my own time and stuff like that. So I really appreciated the support because I think the professors that I had my freshman year were actually great. They were pretty accommodating, and I developed pretty good relationships with some of them there in the beginning. But I think more than anything, it was just finding the right people like yourself and some of my friends who I'm still very close with today, who kind of helped, right? They helped pull me in the right direction because they were focused on getting better and on their education. And I think I just kind of went with people who I felt, a bond with, and I felt like we shared values and morals and so on and so forth. So, and aspirations, I think maybe is a big one too, right? I started trying to surround myself with people who thought that they could accomplish good things. So
talk a little bit about some of the, before we get in the internships, like talk a little bit about some of the business. I don't know if you call it a business per se. I'd call it a business. The business you started, and kind of just like your community activity in a way in college, specifically referring to the apparel brand that you ran, and everything that surrounded that.
Yeah. So when I think it was our sophomore year, I read a book called Tuesdays with Maury, and it's about a professor and a student, and the professor has ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and basically a neurodegenerative disease, and it's terminal. And at the same time that I was reading that book, one of my mentors from high school and somebody who was a close family friend was diagnosed with ALS. And simultaneously, this is important because it's relevant to what happens in the future. But I also was learning about Gymshark as a brand and about Ben Francis and how he started it in his parents' house while he was delivering pizzas and so on and so forth. So I became very reflective in that time, right? When my mentor was diagnosed with a terminal disease, and I was reading that book and kind of reflecting on life and what I wanted to do and what impact I wanted to have. So all of it kind of came together, and I decided to start a clothing brand where a portion of the proceeds went directly back to my mentor and his family to support them throughout, their medical bills and their battle with ALS. And I learned a lot throughout that process. I think the most valuable thing that came out of it, to be honest with you, was just bringing me a little bit closer to my community and my mentor himself and learning from him. But it also taught me a lot about what it takes to survive as an entrepreneur. And a lot of the a lot of the pivotal moments during that, it was a short-lived brand, just to be transparent. I mean, it was successful per se, but it wasn't long-lived. But a lot of the pivotal moments in that business were surrounded around community events and bringing people together and spreading the word about ALS and about, living your life to the fullest, because that was really the whole gist of the company. And I think that taught me a lesson, just that really at the end of the day, no matter what business you're starting or what avenue, career path you're following, it always comes back to the people that you can surround yourself with and people in your community and beyond. And so anyways, I could take that a lot of different directions, but I learned a lot of valuable lessons from that. And the way that it ended was kind of funny, but I'll save that for another day, because maybe not too important for this conversation.
Yeah, it definitely was an interesting ending, and we'll leave that as like a, got to reach out and figure out what happened. Maybe we'll save that for episode 2. The point that you highlighted, and it was the point I was going to make, and it was about you and just the intentions that you had just as a human being. I really respected that, and everyone really trusted what you were standing for and what you were trying to accomplish. I was amazed at your hustle to, again, outreach to the community to grow your brand and help, use the brand as a way to help others. But I was also really impressed just again with how scrappy you were in terms of, figuring out how to set up your Shopify store, going on, having those conversations with, their customer service or IT team, whatever it is, to get things customized, to get it right for you, going and getting all of the shipment sent out to the local USPS store, USPS store. I was, when you're in an environment where whether or not the person is having success in their business, but they're in it and they're doing it, and you can tell they're learning and they're growing as a person because of it, it's contagious, especially when you have that entrepreneurial mindset and you have someone literally licking, sticking, and packing the product in your living room. You can't help but want to get down there and be a part of it, at least the way that I'm cut out. And I know that's the way you're cut out too. So obviously you had that experience in that business. Talk a little bit about where you went from there, because you wrapped up that entity. The entrepreneurial journey, I don't want to say stopped, but it took a direction of, okay, well, maybe I'll focus perhaps more on internships and getting, going the more traditional path that most college students strive for, which is working for the biggest company they can work for with the best training program.
Yeah, I think even just on the note of, going back to like talking about how it's all about people, one of my favorite parts of that whole business was exactly what you're talking about. When we were on the living room floor, we had our other roommate, his name was Jake Lamb, and all of us are packing orders and doing, we think about, entrepreneurship and a lot of people who run successful companies and they make all this money, and, a lot of people aspire to reach that point. But I'll just speak from our experience, having started a couple of companies on our own. You see the money coming in from your orders and you're not even thinking like, oh, like I'm going to take this money and take a huge salary and spend it on, a fancy car. Especially in the beginning, I'm thinking, okay, where do I need to spend this money to even just keep this business alive? Because especially, in clothing in particular, I was taking pre-orders in order to fund my actual orders to get people their clothes in time for Christmas. And you guys were such a huge part of that. And it was just so much fun to be, it was stressful, but it was so fun to be involved with other people who were willing to kind of help share in that journey. So it was a lot of fun. But to your point, yeah, so that company did come to an end. And one of the major contributing factors as to why it came to an end was because I wasn't willing to fight for it. And that's just the honest truth. I think if I had continued and I had the perseverance required at the time, and I had the belief in myself and in others and everything like that to kind of push through some of the adversity that we faced towards the end, the company could be alive and thriving right now, simply if for no other reason because of the message that it came along with. But I was definitely down on myself after that when it came to my belief in whether or not I could start and run something successful, because that had come to an end and I knew it didn't have to. So I ended up kind of doubling down and going along the UC co-op route and doing some internships at bigger companies, focusing on kind of marketing and market analysis for some healthcare companies. I did a stint in the winter at not Delta High Tech, but River City Pharma. And so that was a lot of fun. And then towards the end, I ended up working an internship after I had added finance as a major at GE Aviation. And that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot and met a lot of great people there. And I ended up interviewing and taking a job with them after I graduated. So it was a long journey, but ultimately, I think looking back, if you had asked high school me whether or not I would ever get a job at GE Aviation working in finance, I would have laughed at you and laughed at myself. I'd have been like, there's absolutely no way. So it was cool just to have hit that milestone and to look back and be like, okay, definitely come a long way.
Yeah, I think the thing for anyone who's listening to this, to put it in context, you were taking, and you're my friend, so I'm willing to just share parts of your story that maybe you didn't touch on. So forbid me if you're like, Grant, please don't talk about that. But I am. I think you got like a C or a D in college algebra.
Oh, D minus.
D minus.
Just on the border. Just on the border.
So for reference, when you go to the University of Cincinnati and to the business school, typically you're going to start off in pre-calc. All right. So number one, Chris was in college algebra. Number two, Chris got a D minus. And so obviously flags are popping up going, hey, maybe math isn't your strong suit. Most people would have taken it that way. But then you wrap around to, okay, Chris ended up getting into the top finance program inside of UC's finance curriculum, and then turned it into landing, a job at perhaps one of the top financial planning and analysis educational internships, whatever you want to call it, at GE. GE has their FP&A program for new grads. Extremely sought after. People come around for it all over the country, and you got into it and you made an awesome run there. Talk a little bit about your experience at GE, what you were doing, and then ultimately what led you to choose a different path for yourself.
I think one of the biggest takeaways, and I learned this from some of our group projects and the different journeys that we took throughout college when we were pitching our own product freshman year and doing stuff similar to that. I picked this up back then too, but it really clicked for me when I went to GE and I was working with other people who, University of Cincinnati is a great school and it's only getting better, but it's not a Cornell and it's not an Ivy League school. It's not, UCLA or whatever. It's just not that caliber. And that's the reality. But when I went to GE, I was working with people who were from those schools. And at first I was obviously very intimidated and, kind of questioned, I'm not sure if I belong here. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to keep up. And then as time went on, I learned that, even people who go to these Ivy League schools, yes, a lot of them are very, very, very smart and they're impressive people, but they have to work hard, just like anyone, in order to have success. And what I realized was that if I worked either as hard or harder than they did, whether that's just in the form of spending more time or digging a little bit deeper on a problem, then I could also perform and keep up with them. And I think that just kind of clicked for me because I was like, okay, well, even if I wasn't born with, a super high IQ, I can at least make up for that with spending time on the right things and just working hard. So I think it clicked for me. Okay, going forward, I think I can have success, even though some of the evidence was against me. If you look back to the business that I started and it came to an end in a way that I wouldn't have liked it to. I think it all kind of started to come full circle and I thought to myself, okay, really what's important here is perseverance. And what's important here is putting your head down, working, and just figuring things out. So I think that was one of the most important things that I learned while I was at GE, in addition to having a great boss, especially in my first rotation, who just pushed me like crazy and helped me find kind of another level to my abilities, and being around some really fantastic people. I always knew though that I didn't want to work a 9 to 5, and for a lot of reasons. And some things came up while I was, I started my work at GE in July of 2020. So GE Aviation is a company that sells jet engines, and the airline industry was getting hit pretty hard during COVID, if people remember. And so my future at GE was just very uncertain all throughout the time that I was working there. I worked there for a year, and it was never, certain as to whether or not I was going to be able to stay on for another rotation, or if I was going to ever be able to have, a full-time job after our rotational program. So after 1 year of working at GE, I moved down to Greenville, South Carolina for my second rotation and worked in a manufacturing shop. And after that, I decided that I was going to leave the corporate world after I had paid off all my student loans and become, relatively financially secure. And I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I just knew that I wanted to do something on my own. And if I was going to be working hard, like I was working at GE, I wanted to be working for myself. And I think that's kind of mindset is something that has helped me connect with a lot of real estate investors, because I think that's really one of the main drivers, right? Is wanting to be able to be financially independent and to answer to no one else but yourself. And that's the same mindset I had. I didn't get involved in real estate right away, which I wish I would have, but it was always on the radar.
Something that I really want to point out, because I think there's a lot of people who, if they're on the younger side, just landing their first job or perhaps making a career change, or they keep changing careers. You had an inflection point when you first started working at GE. We lived together at the time, roommates, and you made the decision that you were going to quit your job, and you were kind of feeling it out to a bunch of different people. Again, you didn't actually end up quitting your job, but you were, on the line of going, hey, I'm going to quit my job. And you'd only been 3 months in. And I think it was kind of uncertain whether or not you were going to be, good at the work that you were going to do, but you chose to stick it out anyways and not let the job determine, not let the job determine the outcome, but let yourself determine the outcome. Meaning, you actually ended up becoming a leader within the program that you were in, and then you decided to leave your job, as opposed to at that time when you were considering leaving your job, it wasn't a decision of like, I'm in a good financial position or anything like that. It was more so, I just, I don't like it. And maybe you can elaborate more on that time, what was going through your head, and then, any advice you'd give to someone who is getting started in a new career, or perhaps starting their first, big time job, and just overcoming that hurdle.
Yeah, I think a big part of this is something that I referenced earlier, which is surrounding yourself with the right people. Because like you touched on, so the conversations that I had with people that I really respected, including yourself, including my parents, including some of my other friends, their opinion carried so much weight. And even just being able to have the conversation without judgment carried so much weight. And that was really important. I think I took my first rotation at GE was one of the harder rotations. There's different levels of difficulty, and it's pretty well known. And when I got into that job, I felt super overwhelmed, and I always, felt like I was kind of drowning in the work, and I was trying to learn, but I couldn't, and all this different stuff. Luckily, I had a boss in the beginning who was incredible. And I remember specifically having a conversation with her in her office where we were going through some of the work that I had done. And I just looked at her and I didn't really have anything to say when she was asking me questions, because I didn't feel like I knew the right answers. And she just kind of sat with me and had this conversation like, listen, you are capable of doing this job. Otherwise, we wouldn't have put you in this role. Otherwise, I wouldn't have continued to bring you into my office and had these conversations. I just would have passed the work on to somebody else. And I think that played a major role in the inflection point, right? Where I was like, okay, maybe, again, I don't mean to keep repeating myself, but it goes back to maybe I just need to put my head down and do the work and stop trying to think about whether or not I belong here or whether or not I should be here. Just kind of having that trust. And sometimes I think it's hard to have that without having, like I said, the right people around, right? Because with the wrong boss, having that belief could just be reinforced. So if you are considering like what job to take or what career path to go on, then I think first and foremost, you have to decide what kind of people do I want to work with, and do these people kind of align with my values and so on and so forth. But I also learned another important lesson during that time, which was that, and I read this book called So Good They Can't Ignore You, which was a recommendation from you, and it's by Cal Newport. And he talks about, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, right? Become so good at your job that they can't ignore you, and that's how you find success going forward. But within the book, he talks about what actually leads to a successful and fulfilling career. And I might not remember all three of them, and so maybe you can help me, Grant, off the top of my head, but at least a few of them are autonomy, competence, and impact. And it might not be in that order because there's actually an order to it as well. So let's just imagine that competence is first, right? Well, there's no way in hell that I could have been competent at that job in 3 months. There's just no chance. And I think I was looking at myself like, oh God, I should be an expert. You know, I'm 3 months in, I don't know anything. I should be an expert here. And mind you, rotations are only 6 months. So I'm halfway through the first rotation in my full-time job. And so when I read that book and I kind of put those pieces together, it really helped me say, okay, maybe this isn't my passion, but also how could I know if I haven't even given it the time to become competent, go through the hard stuff? Once you get competent, then your business or your boss grants you autonomy. And right, once you have the freedom to, you know, work on what you think is most impactful, then you start to have an impact on the business and you start to feel fulfilled. So again, that could be in the wrong order. I'm not sure if all that is, you know, spelled out the right way, but that's the general idea of it. And that all of that put together, those conversations with friends, having the right boss who pushed me and also believed in me, and then learning that, okay, maybe I should give it some time and go through the hard stuff before I make a judgment call as to whether or not I continue down this career path. That all helped me kind of push forward.
So many good nuggets there. One of the things that I just want to highlight is you can go through school, and you and I both went through college, and, you know, for all purposes, in my personal case, I graduated at the top of my class in basically any way you can measure. Student marshal, had the top grades. You yourself landed, you know, the top basically FP&A job out of school anyways in the area, and some would argue, you know, regionally or nationally. And it was extremely hard relative to how well you were performing in school. And I just want to say that because it's like you said, these people who are super smart, who also had this job, they have to work tremendously hard to be good at it too. And that was something that I just thought I was going to show up to my first job. Like you probably thought you were going to show up to your job after, you know, the experience you had, and probably just do pretty well, just in general. And you did end up doing very well. But again, it was just much harder than you could have anticipated on the onset. There's nothing like the real thing. And no matter how much schooling you take, it doesn't prepare you for exactly what you're going to be doing. So just wanted to kind of pass that advice, generally speaking, out to the audience, whoever might be experiencing the job search, or, like I said, performing on their job for the first few months.
Yeah. And it's significantly harder than the internships too, which was really kind of eye-opening for me because I had done an internship at that company, and starting the full-time job was exponentially harder than doing the internship because there's just a different level of expectations. So I think that's, you know, worth mentioning just to maybe help prepare people as well if they're going from that transition.
Now we're going to speed it up to your decision to leave the job and then what you kind of went into. I know you have a whole YouTube video out there about why you left your job. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, I think it has like a couple 100,000 views. So it's not too hard to find if you just look up Chris Cascella on YouTube. But why don't you go ahead and talk about, you know, a little more in depth, your decision to leave, what your financial situation kind of looked like. And then ultimately, you know, what were you going to do? Like, what was your plan?
Yeah. I didn't have a plan. just to be totally transparent. I was lucky in the sense that GE paid well, but they also paid for your relocation if you went to a different city. And I did go to a different city for my second rotation. So I moved from Cincinnati to Greenville, South Carolina for a lot of reasons. And, I don't know how in-depth I want to get or how in-depth people would want me to get, but just generally speaking, we were still kind of going through COVID, right? And at least kind of like starting to come out of it when I went to Greenville. The reason I decided to go was because I was just trying to find kind of myself. I had taken this job for a couple of reasons, somewhat to prove to myself that I could do it, somewhat to take a job that paid well so I could pay back my student loans quickly, and somewhat, to be totally honest, to show people from, the area that I grew up that I could do it. Because like I said, I was always a bad student. I never really applied myself, but I wanted to just show the world and show myself that I could do it. But while I was around great people at work, I wasn't really finding my groove outside of work. And I wanted to go somewhere where I didn't know anybody. I had grown up in Cincinnati. I went to UC. I took a job headquartered in Cincinnati. I just felt like I needed to go kind of explore a little bit. So I went to Greenville, had a great experience there. And luckily I was able to save a decent amount of money while I was working at GE, and from the relocation package and just from the job itself. And I think that's the biggest kind of hindrance for people when they do feel like they want to leave their job, is they're like, okay, well, I don't know if I'm going to be financially secure or if I'm going to be able to do this. So full transparency, I saved up just over $20,000, which I felt like was enough for me to live, at least for a year if I lived conservatively. And it all kind of came to a head after that rotation. I made the decision. I kind of already talked about that. I knew I didn't want to work a 9-to-5, but pulling the trigger was definitely difficult for a couple of reasons. One, because it's terrifying. This is the first time in my life I'm leaving the structure of our education system and or a secure job that has, hours of 9-to-5 and projects that you work on and deadlines and stuff like that, and going into a world where I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to figure this out. And I kind of bring that up because I think, again, a lot of real estate investors can connect with that, and it would probably resonate with them, because it's, there's no handbook for how to be a real estate investor. I mean, there are books that you can read, but nothing that tells you exactly how to do it. And so I kind of experienced something similar to that in leaving my job and deciding to go on my own path. Again, to your point, I didn't have a plan. I genuinely did not know what I was going to do. All I knew was that I wanted to be forced to figure it out, because I was being challenged at my job in professional ways, some personal ways, but really I wanted to be challenged just to a different level and say, okay, you don't have this regular income. You're not making a hefty paycheck every week or every 2 weeks. What are you going to do in order to reach the goals and aspirations that you have for yourself and for your family? And it was kind of a tumultuous journey. A lot of it was kind of, again, self-reflection, figuring out where I wanted to go, what path I wanted to take. I started putting out YouTube videos. I started kind of posting on social media, thinking maybe that was the avenue that I wanted to go down. Really glad I did that, because I met a lot of great people through doing that. And I also kind of really proved to myself that, I don't care about putting myself out there. Like, I don't care so much about what other people think. What do I want? And so that was a really important journey. I also had a short stint part-time at Lululemon, met some of my closest friends now from Lululemon. Definitely had moments where I was a little bit embarrassed when I saw people walking in and they're like, oh, are you just work here, every once in a while, like on the weekends or something? And I'm like, no, this is my only job. And so that was definitely, it was a character building, moment there, because I was 23 or 24 working at Lululemon and didn't have anything else going for me. And I was just trying to figure it out. So, again, I think a lot of character building moments throughout the journey, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more. And, building this company, Sharper Capital, that's built a lot of character, and I'm sure it'll only get, it'll get harder, but it'll also get better. So it's kind of where we're at.
You hit it on a great point there. And I did notice a significant change in just the person that you became from the time that you left your job, and really the reflection and personal development work. I think you really started picking it up heavily, even when you were already starting or continuing to work at GE, but especially when you left, you had more time. And when you have that much time, there's a lot of questions that you can get around to answering that most people put off maybe until after they've gotten their kids out of the house and they're empty nesters. So that's something that I think more people should partake in, is deep self-reflection, understanding yourself and understanding what your values are, what you want out of life, and then designing a path forward to go out and just get after it. You had to be so vulnerable too. And not just in the sense that you didn't have a job when you were just at GE in their FP&A program doing really well, but you also went to social media and you said, here's why I quit my job, with no backup plan, which is not something that most people go on the internet and tell people about. So I think something that you might be able to speak to, and it even kind of shows with what happened at Lululemon, where it's like, hey, here I was working this, very well-to-do job, a job that most people strive for, and they might work their life at a company like that, work their way up the ranks. But there you were in Lululemon going, hey, this is my life. And, all that stuff is kind of by the wayside now. Just the vulnerability had to be to an extreme, to the point where you had to get so secure in yourself that it didn't matter what other people thought.
Yeah. Yeah, it was hard. And one of the reasons why I wanted to share at least part of my story was because there were a lot of people who had shared theirs, people that I knew and people that I didn't know, that had a significant impact on me. And really, the decision that I had to make, and a lot of people have to make, is what do I want? What do I actually want in general and for my life versus what is convenient now? And there's never a point in time, I don't think, where what's convenient now, well, I won't be that general, but most of the time what's convenient now is not necessarily what's going to help you get closer to your long-term goals. And, it's the whole idea of delayed gratification, but it's taken to an extreme because it's your livelihood, right? It's your paycheck, it's your financial security. And on top of, that strong base of your financial security and that being so important, it's also this vulnerability piece where you have to look at people in the eyes and say, I don't have your traditional 9-to-5 job. I'm not working at some secure company. I took a leap of faith and I'm working, in my case, part-time at an athletic store. And it teaches you a lot about yourself, right? There's nowhere to hide in that moment. It was really easy to hide at GE and hide what was going on behind the scenes when I could just hide behind this position and this kind of company name. But once you get rid of that and you're just kind of by yourself and you're on your own, there's no hiding it. And I think that was really important for me in terms of my personal and also now my professional development. Has just made me a more well-rounded person, but it was definitely difficult.
All right. So from that point, working at Lululemon, where did you go? When did you end up leaving that job? And then, what were the decisions that ultimately led to you coming over here to Sharper Capital?
I think it was in December of 2021. You and I were talking and you were like, you floated the idea out of potentially working together. And to be honest, I think I've told you this, but I was like, okay, he brought it up once. I'm like, maybe it'll be there. Maybe it won't. I'm just going to keep working there. And if he brings it up again, then we can chat. And it was either January or February. We were talking again and you're like, all right, well, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, what do you mean? But that question, what are you doing, hit me hard. What are you doing with yourself and what's your plan? And it's one thing to not have it when you leave your job, but after, 6 months or so, it's like, okay, what direction are you heading in? And then you brought it up again and I knew that you were serious. And, back in the day when you had first started the company, we had that conversation of, you never know what where this is going to take you and what opportunities are going to arise. And I think we always had these conversations like, we want to work together. We want to build something, and we want to have an impact and help other people through our business. And I think this presented itself, and we didn't know what it was going to look like, but we had the conversation of let's just figure it out. And so February of 2022, I left Lululemon, had to say goodbye, and came over here and started working with you at Sharper Capital. And we took a lot of time kind of figuring out what it was going to look like and where we wanted it to go. So
I remember where I was when we had the conversation that ultimately led to you joining the company. And so I had listened to this podcast, Sweaty Startup, Nick Huber's podcast, and I really like what Nick Huber puts out there. It's just like his principles about small business and all those good things. And he talked about his partnership with his business partner in one of his episodes. And I just thought to myself, why not right now? Why not right now? And so that is when I called you. I was literally in my driveway, driving home for lunch. And I was like, what are you doing, man? Like, I just feel like if we just worked together and figured out what we were supposed to do, we could do something really impactful. We could do something big together. And I'm still working, the full-time medical device sales job when I'm making this call. And so, it's one of those things where I know that my time is limited, so I can expand my reach, but I can also open doors too to help the business grow. And I specifically remember, when I hired you to come into the company, you wanted to be W-2 because you had experience in 1099, being a 1099 employee in the past. And you're like, I did not like having to pay all those taxes at the end of the year. and I just was like, sure, I'll figure it out. It took me like a year and a half to figure out how to pay all those taxes. And we're laughing, right? I mean, look, it didn't take a year and a half. It took about a year. So shave off 6 months. But I didn't know what I was doing. I just said, we'll figure it out. We'll fail forward, And you came, and the first thing that we did, I tried to have you standardize all my SOPs for the self-storage business that I had. And, again, we were thinking probably more on the equity side, right? When we first started working together. But then you started working on the lending side, because that's actually what started taking up some of my time, because I had a private lending business, or not private lending business at the time. I wouldn't even call it that. I had an LLC that I was originating loans out of and funding them basically myself. But maybe talk some of the early stages about what our processes looked like in that, and what your role really was early on there.
Yeah, I think this is one of the coolest things, to be honest with you, just about entrepreneurship in general, is from the outside, I don't know what people look at and feel or think when they, see Sharper Capital. I think they see our website, which you did a great job on, and everybody, compliments us. It looks very professional. It looks great. And I think we operate our business very professionally, but I think the behind the scenes of operating a business are just so much messier and less linear than people probably imagine. And so, especially when you're talking about those early days, like you said, it wasn't really a formal business, so to speak, at the time. It was kind of almost, I don't want to call it a side hustle, but something similar, right? And so standardizing a lot of the processes and figuring out, okay, all this is happening in your brain. And so all the steps, but if we were to actually make this a system, what does it look like? And I think that took a long time, because when you ask yourself that question and you have to go through the process and explain it to somebody else, you uncover so many details which you may have taken for granted that are important and necessary to succeeding in that process and seeing something through to the end. Especially, in our case, it's seeing a loan all the way through to closing, and then through the servicing, and then through the payoff, and so on. And there's a lot of steps in that process. I think part of being naive is actually works in your favor when you're starting a business, because you have no idea how hard it's actually going to be. No idea. and you have no idea how much work it's actually going to take, whether that's in the form of time, whether that's in the form of energy, conversations, money, whatever it might be, all of the above even. So a lot of that time that we spent was really like, okay, how do we take this thing that's having success but isn't actually a thing, it's just a lot of different things that are put together, and turn it into a business? And we spent a lot of time on that. I mean, not even being around the bush, it was months and months and months of sitting down on Saturday mornings and putting together a business plan and figuring out what our specific roles were going to be. Because when you're in a partnership, it's so important to be able to focus on different things and help one partner carry a little bit of their weight when they need it, and vice versa. And a lot of that is learning as you go. It's impossible to forecast it and say, predict exactly what it'll look like. But that messy early stages, I think, was just so much fun, especially looking back.
One of the things that it was actually kind of hard for me to let go of was, okay, this lending thing is what's making all the money. We really want to be taking down self-storage, which, although I own and operate self-storage, in terms of sourcing leads in order to acquire that type of asset, I was just as in the dark as I would have been on the lending side. So with you coming in, we were basically we were actually just servicing one client. And it's funny because our processes and procedures, when you write an SOP, it's role-based, right? Because you can lose an employee, or they're just a standardized customer. They're not a specific person. But in our situation, when we wrote our SOPs, and not really wrote the SOPs, but did the what would you call it? The workflow. And it was the client's name. So that's what was so funny about it. It's like this whole entity that was, paying Chris, and supporting some of the other very, very small expenses at the time. Those were all, centered around servicing basically one person. And again, we didn't know any better. The way that our business was operating, by our understanding, by my understanding, was usual and customary. And the things that I was doing back then, or we were doing back then as a business, we would write those things off as taboo at this point, because those are big no-nos and we shouldn't do those anymore. So it just comes to show you, how much, like you said, that you don't know when you first get started. And when did you first get this sense of what we were trying to build with the lending company itself? Because I think we say September is when we said we really got started, but I'm not exactly sure when September of 2022, I should say, but I'm not exactly sure when we really sat down and we're like, hey, yeah, no, this is this is the general direction of where we're going to take the company that we have.
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I know what the catalyst or the impetus was, and it was learning about other people's businesses and how they had it set up and in the way that they structured it. And I think, I don't know the exact month, but it was during that summer, sometime before September, during that summer. And that's when we really looked at each other and were like, okay, this isn't just going to be the cash vehicle that brings us money so that we can invest in self-storage. This is actually going to be the primary business, and we're going to build on this foundation and try to make it a long-term, long-standing entity and successful business. And that's when we sat down and we started hashing through the business plan and trying to assign roles and deciding, our year 1 goals, our year 3 goals, our year 5 goals, and so on and so forth, which again, probably so off on those, but in a good way. And so I think it was sometime during that summer.
So talk a little bit about what was going on in, September, what our actual go-to-market strategy looked like for the lending business, and then just how long it took to actually get things going.
Yeah, it's crazy looking back, even at some of our old loan calculators that we had. And I think we had good knowledge of the business because we had been doing it. It wasn't like we were just completely new. We had been lending to somebody who had done a lot of high volume, he had done high volume. He did a lot of business. We learned a ton. But, I think taking that leap from something that's unofficial to official, there's a lot that goes with that. And so, quoting people at new terms, going through a new process with a new legal team, and getting things to closing with newer title companies who we had never worked with before. I mean, all the stuff that we might have taken for granted, it became very difficult. So, when we were trying to figure out too what we felt comfortable with, from a lending perspective with some other people and stuff like that. So it took a little while. All that to say, it took a little while to really get the ball rolling and start doing business with newer clients who we hadn't worked with in the past. And just a lot of learning throughout that time, a lot of failure, so to speak, on an individual basis when you're thinking about quoting a loan and not getting it, or not winning somebody's business, not being able to help them out, help them take down a property. So a lot of failure in that time period, but a lot of learning. And I think, there's so much you could talk about even just in those first few months, starting in September, where we didn't know if we had proof of concept. We didn't know if we fit in the market. We didn't know if this was going to work. And so it took a lot of, we had a lot of conversations where we would just kind of sit down in our office and be like, listen, I think this is going to work and here's why, and just come up with evidence, even though maybe we didn't even have any. So a lot of learning that took place there.
We had saved up a significant amount of cash in the business at the time. So we did have, I would say at least 6 to 9 months of cash runway in the business to where if nothing changed, if we didn't do anything, we would be able to pay for Chris's salary and cover just like the minor expenses that we had in our business at the time. And every day, I think the first month, if I was looking at the numbers, and we don't keep track of every lead probably as well as we should. But back then, I think we quoted like 40 different loans in September. And when you're the new lender on the block, you tend to just get some tire kickers to see what you're up to. And jokes on them because we weren't really sure what we were up to either. But we probably, of all 40 loans that we quoted through our faults or through, the deal just not making sense, we didn't close any of them. And then in October, or in August and October, we didn't really have that much lead flow. And the lead flow that we did have wasn't very good there either. So we basically gone 3 months with nothing happening, no sales. We still had an existing portfolio, so some interest income was accruing, but the expenses were certainly larger than the income that we were going to be receiving. But here we were, we would check in with each other, and we were drinking the Kool-Aid from some of the other lenders that we were learning their business, and we were not just, we weren't just listening to podcasts. We were applying everything and throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what stuck.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff was just all over the place. But talk about where do you feel like the business started to click? Where do you feel like you started to gain traction and gain a level of understanding of, okay, this is how the business works. Here's what my role is going to be. Here's what my strengths are and all that.
Yeah. I think so much of this is just reps. It's just like anything else that you're starting out, whether you start going to the gym and you feel really uncomfortable pushing up the barbell on the bench press because you've never done it before. Your body doesn't know what direction it's supposed to push, which muscles have to fire to get it up in a straight line. It's like you have to put in those reps for your body to learn. And the same thing goes for starting a new business. And so, you talk about, we quoted 40 loans in 1 month. We lost some of those because of my incompetence, and we lost some of them because they just weren't good deals. But at the time, it was hard to distinguish which was which, because a lot of them might have been good deals, but I also wasn't totally competent because these were some of my first reps in our new structure. And so much of those early days was figuring out, where am I screwing up? Where am I doing things right? And having that, building that confidence. And, you think about it, it's like you're underwriting deals in some places that you're not familiar with. You're underwriting deals with people that you've never worked with before, who's thrown out some new language or might view things a little bit differently. And you're just trying to figure out where you fit into the mix and how you can be as valuable and useful as possible while still running a safe and effective business, as safe as you can make it, right? While also, being out there and being in the game. So I think after months and months of doing that and having conversations and also developing relationships with just great people who helped provide a lot of insight into the business and gave a lot of advice and also walked us through some of their deals and some of the stuff that they had done, that's when it started to click, when we wrote our first loan with our first client, who was somebody, you in particular had developed a great relationship with, because we had been showing up to these meetups month after month. We had been hopping on the virtual calls every week. We had just been continuing to put ourselves out there and to show up and being consistent. Even if we weren't being consistent in necessarily the right ways, we were continuing to show up. And through that, we developed great relationships and ended up writing our first loan. And that's when it all becomes real, right? Because regardless of how many dozens and dozens and dozens of loans we had written before at our old model, we were trying to fit into the market with a new model. And until you close on your first deal with a new model, you really don't have any proof of concept. So seeing that one all the way through to the end, and also being able to apply a lot of the lessons that we had learned from some of these other lenders and be like, wow, this stuff that they're talking about does work in the real world. And here's the paperwork to prove it, and here's the property that we're lending against to prove it. That's when it really started to roll. And I don't want to say it was all kind of like, sunshine and roses from that moment on, because it certainly was not. But that definitely helped us where, we took a step back and looked at each other and we're like, okay, we have something here and we can actually provide value to the market and help people take down deals and scale their portfolio. And that's exactly what we're here for.
So, and first and foremost, I completely agree with that being the first instance of, okay, there is a demand for this product the way that we want to do it, which was the big hurdle, because the way that we were lending out previously, it wasn't necessarily wrong or bad, but it just left us exposed more than we really wanted to be if we were going to be lending out at scale. So when we got a deal done, and it was in a creative way, we used cross collateral to negate the down payment that the borrower needed to bring to closing. And so I think all in all, after their earnest money deposit, they came up with like $1,900 to closing or something just crazy small.
They got prorated rents too. They came out of pocket $214 on the day of closing, because they had their earnest money applied to it, and they got prorated rents and a couple of other credits too. So super small.
Yeah. So all that considered, we had to learn not only just how to write a loan, but how to do the loans creatively so that we could actually be competitive enough to get our first deal done. And after that one, it seemed like right after that, we got another one. And it was like, okay, well, here we go. Here's another example of just another reinforcement of, hey, there is a demand in the marketplace for this. And the product that we have is in the vicinity of competitive. And it's funny when we talk about product, because we're talking about a loan, it's something that's almost fictitious. It's paper, it's, documents and things like that. But you've actually done a great job, Chris, of streamlining the service that we can provide to the client so that we can take them from project start to project close very quickly. And your communication throughout that process is seamless. So I want to just say kudos to you for embracing that, because that has just been so instrumental to our success. One of the things that I really want to key on here is, you really don't know how successful your business is going to be. And we've been doing a good job of clearing the road ahead of us so that we can continue to make progress and continue to grow. What does the business look like 9 months now from when we really got the marketing strategy dialed in and started actively pursuing outside or new borrowers for the business?
I think it's just a lot more refined, right? And to your point, communication is such a big part of this business in real estate in general, because there's so many moving pieces. And, you hear horror stories of other lenders coming up with surprises throughout the process, or a couple of days before closing, they're asking for more documentation, or they're asking for more money, or they're tacking on, additional fees that people didn't know about before. And I think so much of being able to communicate with our clients is dependent upon how much knowledge we actually have about our own business and about what they're trying to do. And so throughout these past 9 months of really refining our structure and our communication and our process itself has allowed us to actually provide a better experience for our clients too, right? Because we know exactly what they expect. And, we can learn as much as we want, between ourselves. But the most important feedback that we get is from the clients. When we're closing with an investor, somebody who's investing in real estate and they're taking out a property, we have the conversation. We're like, listen, what did we do well, and what could we work on here? Like, how do we provide the best experience for you all? We know now what we want from our perspective. We know what we want our business to look like. We know what we need to have in place in order to have it operate successfully. And so what levers can we pull or changes can we make in our communication and our process and our products that provides a better experience for our clients? And that's really where we're at now. Whereas before, when we were first starting, we were like, they would ask, a client would ask us for something, or I'll speak for myself. A client would ask me for something, I'd be like, I don't know. A famous line, not famous, but a line that I used so much was, let me talk to my business partner, I'll get back to you. Because that was another way of me saying, I have no idea. Let me have a conversation. And I definitely use that line a lot less now, because like I said, we know what we're comfortable with, and we know what we need to do for the client and what we're able to do for the client to help them as much as possible, while also maintaining our own safety and security for our investors.
So we've gone on quite a bit here, and I want to kind of end up in the place where we first started, which was ending up in a business where you kind of controlled your own destiny. Back in college, we were going to local real estate meetups and everything like that. I mean, we were still going to REIA-GC and had every inclination. We were viewing properties while we were in college. I was, out of college, but you were still in college, looking to get started purchasing assets. Again, having no clue exactly what we were looking at, how bad or good a condition of the property was in. I would just be like, well, could I live here or could I not live here? That was like the only metric that I had. We recently acquired a property. Why don't you go ahead and talk about what the idea or vision is of what the company can do with acquiring assets, what you're trying to do for yourself, and what you'd like to see your future looking like?
Yeah, this one, this property that we just acquired, it came about in a pretty interesting way. Like we've talked about, we've developed some great relationships in specifically, all throughout Ohio, Northern Kentucky, but specifically in Ohio, in Cincinnati as well. Just a lot of great relationships with some really great people. And so I had floated out the idea to a couple of my agent, friends, that I would be looking at taking down a property this year. And I was just going to do the old, the whole house hacking thing that Brandon Turner made famous. And so I hadn't, said when and where I was going to start looking, but just having that idea in mind, one of my agent friends sent me a property on a Friday night and was like, hey, I think this one's pretty underpriced. I would have listed it at this price. They went live at this price. I think there's an opportunity here. So he sends me that Friday night. Saturday morning, we go and we walk it. We think that there's great potential. But I was going to use FHA financing, try to mitigate my down payment and increase my return overall. And it wouldn't have passed FHA inspection because of a couple of safety issues, related to the patio on the second floor and the railings, a couple of broken windows. And so I had the conversation with my agent, and I was like, this one's probably not going to work. And we had a conversation. He said, well, why don't you just take it down with Sharper Capital? And at the end of doing all the renovation, you can transfer it to yourself. You can make it so there's a spread for Sharper Capital for it to be worthwhile to have, the capital out there. You're secured against a great asset that you're getting into at a great price. and your ARV on this thing should work very, very well. And so that's what we're doing. And so we're in the process right now. We closed on that and a couple of weeks ago. So April 28th, it's May 10th. And tenants are supposed to move out by May 23rd. We're going to do some renovation on the property. Some of the work we're going to do ourselves, some of the work we're hiring out. And overall, I think this one I'm going to hold on to in my personal portfolio, and I'm going to live in there for a little bit. I'm going to rent out the top unit. And I think I can see that, we've had this conversation, Grant, where we don't need to hit home runs all the time. We don't even need to hit home runs ever if we want to be successful. What we need to do is slowly but surely hit base hits, right? Whether that's a single or a double or whatever it might be. And over time, I think doing the right thing and not necessarily playing it safe, but playing it smart, I think you think about compounding, you think about how things accumulate. That's really how I see it. Maybe it's one property a quarter. That's kind of a figure that I've thrown out there, you've thrown out there as, helping us get to where we want to go, acquiring one decent asset per quarter throughout the year. Even if it's a little bit less than that, even if it's, semi-annually, then I think that would be great depending on what assets we're getting. But long-term, it's just like anybody else. We want the financial independence. We want the relatively passive income, but we also want to, like we touched on earlier, we want to have an impact and we want to help people while we're doing well by doing good. And I think this has been a good business to kind of do that in. And I think real estate in general, this is something I talk to our clients about all the time. Real estate in general is a great way to do that, because a good landlord has a massive impact on as many people as they rent out properties to. And some of those, we think about some of our clients, it's a lot of people. And even if it's somebody who's flipping properties or helping improve neighborhoods. And so just being a part of that in one way or another, whether it's on the lending side or on the actual equity investor side, I think that's the long-term vision, and just taking it one step at a time.
I think that's one of the best points you could have hit on there. We're not in it as a get rich quick scheme. There's nothing that's quick and easy besides the product that we try to create for the borrowers that we work with.
Except our closing times.
Except our closing times. And we try to make it quick and easy for everyone else. And we try to facilitate and run a business that we think it makes sense for all stakeholders that are involved in and around the business. One of the things that I know I personally got caught up in is I had this theory in my mind that I was going to go out and earn 20% cash on cash returns, and I was just going to find properties that did that. And there's certainly operators out there that do that. This first property that you're taking down certainly will not do that, but it will be a good property. It will perform well, it'll rent well, and it will appreciate in value a substantial bit if it's maintained and taken care of and treated accordingly. And I think that is just such a good lesson for anyone who's listening, because you think when you're going to, just like when you start your job, you think you're going to go in and crush it. And the same thing is true when you go and you start investing in real estate, or because it's a business in of itself. You think you're just going to go out there and do amazing things very quickly. But it really is about just doing good deals that make sense over and over and over and over and over again, and setting yourself up to be in a position where the house of cards isn't going to come tumbling down.
Right.
So I know we've covered a lot. We've covered your story. I'm super appreciative that you shared all of the parts of your life that you might have wanted to keep closer to the chest, but I know you're a pretty open book. So again, I just appreciate that about you. While we're kind of heading out here, any advice that you want to give to someone starting off in their career in real estate, what have you?
I think the biggest takeaway that I have from all of the experiences in my life, and that's the only thing that I can really speak to, because everybody's circumstances, everybody's perspective, everybody's experiences it's all different, right? But from my perspective and from the experiences that I've had, having a bias towards action is so important, because you can fantasize about leaving your job for your entire life. You can fantasize about starting a business for your entire life. You can fantasize about taking down your first property forever. But you can also make excuses as to why you shouldn't or why you can't. forever as well. And at the end of the day, even if you don't come out as successful as you like to be on your first one, I always like to talk to my clients about this. And, Grant and I talk about this at length as well. You're getting paid when you take action, not necessarily in the money, but in experience, right? You're getting over this massive hump and you're making something real just simply by taking action. And there's no substitute for that. You can educate yourself as much as you want. You can fantasize about it as much as you want. And I'm saying this to everybody because it's something that I've had to learn through my own life. But until you actually sit down and, it's one thing to think about quitting your job, but when I thought about quitting my job, I imagined it as this sexy, great, wonderful thing. And then I sat down and I had to have the conversation with my boss and say, hey, I'm leaving. And then it became real. And I could have put that off for so long. And in fact, I did. I put it off longer than I would have liked to. But once I had that conversation, it was hard, but it felt like a weight was lifted off my chest. And the same thing goes for taking down, my first property. I put offers on properties in the past and then walked away with cold feet because I just wanted to nickel and dime. And the truth of it is, I didn't necessarily want to get this smoking deal. I was just scared of getting into a bad deal. And I look back now and I gave up on, some deals that would have been absolutely killer. And, now this one that we're taking down, it may or may not be killer, but we've learned so much and we've gotten over the fear of actually signing the contract and wiring the money. So have a bias towards action. That's a long-winded way of saying, go for it because life is too short not to.
Couldn't agree more. If I had to wrap it up myself too, man, that's exactly where I'd go. The highest form of learning is always doing, and nothing has taught us more than actually living it and not just preaching it. So, all right. That's all for this show. If you want to get in touch with Chris, obviously all of his contact information will be posted in the description of this video below, or you can just visit us at sharpercapitalpartners.com. If you've listened all the way to the end here, which I know this has been a long episode, please give this show a raving review so we can continue to spread education, inspiration, and wisdom to help other investors build their portfolio in real estate. We will see you in the next one.